Hello, Deep Voice here again, and back by popular demand, we have our good guest, David Gohl. David Gohl, please introduce yourself.
I've been the director of the Chester Ronning Center for the Study of Religion and Public Life at the University of Alberta. Teach religious studies, philosophy, things of that nature.
Anyways, today we'll be talking about the topic of how some people have a very problematic view of the human body, and perhaps some of the origins in history, and some of the different thoughts throughout history in different sects, and how it affects people today, and basically how does these particular different views of the human condition vary from sect to sect, and how they also manifest themselves in this modern day. David Gohl?
Well, it's interesting to me, certainly in the whole history of religions, there's a huge discussion and competing perspectives on the nature of the body, on the nature of the person, on the nature of the spirit, on the nature of the soul. And we normally think of sort of two schools of thought here. One of which is dualistic, where the body is one thing, and then there's a spiritual dimension to being a human person, and that's another thing. That kind of dualism, I'm often inclined to think that that's actually part of natural religion. That is so common in human culture to think in those terms, to think in these dualistic terms. And one must wonder, where does that actually come from? What's happened here? We know from modern psychological studies that if a human being is abused, if a child is abused, that they will bilocate. They will not identify with their body in any direct way. They develop kind of a very distant relationship from their body. And we see, and there are many forms of abuse, One form of abuse is also not ever having been given much of the world of meaning to help shape your life. And one can become very estranged and alienated as a result of that.
Almost nihilistic.
Yeah, and nihilistic. So there's, in our world, one of the most horrific manifestations of this these days is the whole phenomena of suicide bombers.
Okay.
How in the world you can take people who are vulnerable, and that's mostly what's done, psychologically, spiritually vulnerable people who don't have anything to live for, and you can promise them that there is another life, another world, and if they only do this and take their own life, they will then come to the fullness of life. So this kind of dualistic thinking, I think, is the common way in which human beings have put the world together. I sometimes refer to it as spiritual schizophrenia.
Spiritual schizophrenia.
Yeah, it's a spiritual split.
Okay.
Now, in the ancient world, certainly going back before the time of the Common Era when Jesus of Nazareth walked the earth, but also up to the 2nd century or so of the Common Era, there were many, many religious schools of thought in the Greek world and in North Africa, the Arab world, Palestine. And the scholars often lump these together by using the word Gnosticism. Gnosis is the old Greek word for knowledge. So the Gnostic movements became very important in the development of Christianity, because you had many in the first several centuries of Christianity. There's this huge debate about who Jesus Christ is.
Oh, yes.
And you see, if you talk about Jesus Christ as having a human nature and a divine nature, it's pretty easy to move from that to say that human beings have a body and a soul, and to see them as separate.
Mm-hmm.
So, on the extreme end of Gnostic movements in that period, you had some of these schools of thought, which argued that the body is essentially to be, it's essentially a problem, and it's to be suppressed. So your passions are meant to be suppressed in dramatic ways. And you get forms of hyper-asceticism
Mm-hmm.
that emerge from that. We can see that in our world today in secular terms,
Oh, really?
periodically. Some people are hyper-ascetic. That's a way of making their other way in the world. And then you had the other schools of thought which said, well, since this life is not the point anyways, and I've got the secret knowledge, the gnosis, taught to me by my little cultic group, I know how to get into paradise, and so I might as well just eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow I die. And in that school of thought, you had examples of it being highly eroticized communities. So what lies behind it? Well, usually we talk about these movements sharing a notion that this world was not created by the creator of all that is. It was created by a demiurge, by a lesser spirit. And as a result, in that thinking, Jesus Christ then becomes something other than what Orthodoxy has developed its understanding around who he is, the fullest expression of God and the fullest expression of man. And the kind of worldview that emerged from this was a dualistic worldview.
Okay.
And that dualistic worldview really, in a sense, saw not only the body, certainly the body, but also all of creation as either a mistake or a place of trial. It certainly wasn't itself part of the commonwealth of God. It was something to be got through and gotten over. Not something to become present to. Not a garden of delight, but rather a sea of alienation. So, one of the, to me, utterly amazing things about the Jewish and Christian traditions was that, as much as I'm inclined to think more than other religious traditions, although many of them grapple with these things in their own particular ways, but certainly one of the real gifts of the Jewish and Christian tradition is to try and diagnose this problem and to try and find the antidote for it. So there is a reason why in the Jewish tradition there is a tremendous emphasis on family, on community, an emphasis on the joys of life, a sense that all creation is good. And there is a reason why in the Christian tradition, because after all, the Christian tradition is a Jewish sect, we have in the Christian tradition Jesus
As fully human and fully divine.
fully human and fully divine, but we also have him we have him rise from the dead.
In body.
And in the creed we say, and I believe in the resurrection of the body. So Christianity, in this kind of orthodox sense, doesn't talk about believing in the resurrection of the soul. There's no split. There is the human person
Yep.
I sometimes say human beings don't have a soul. They are a soul. But our body isn't split from the rest of us. So that being said, I mean, that has tremendous implications. That way the Christian revelation is all about incarnation, in skarkosis, embodiment.
Mm-hmm.
It's not about ensoulment. It's about embodiment. But we have to remember that this is a human struggle, because the vast majority of human beings, they do have struggles with their senses, with their passions, with their appetites. We suffer, we misunderstand our impulses, we do things which we didn't really intend to do, we don't do things which we intended to do. You know, a great example of this struggle is the Apostle Paul. The Apostle Paul said, "What I would I do not, what I do I would not." And Paul had clear struggles with his body.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, we have monasticism developed in Christianity, which becomes a kind of relief valve for Gnosticism.
Yeah.
We also have monastic communities and monks which treat their body very harshly.
Mm-hmm.
But we have to be compassionate, because these are people that have very particular and deep and profound struggles.
Yep.
With some aspect of their life, which manifests itself through the body. So I think, Derek, the reason sort of dualism exists in such a ubiquitous way is because the nature of our consciousness and the nature of our experience and the accumulation of memory, that all of this sets before human beings an enormous challenge of how to be whole and what it means to be a whole person. We know what it means to be fragmented.
Mm-hmm.
We know what it means to be distracted. But what does it mean to be whole? And how can I be present without any one of my senses dominating my life or becoming the prism through which I see the world, and as a result, polluting the world and my life at the same time?
Do you believe possibly, like I'm thinking with modern academic, do you think it's possible the modern problems we've been seeing in society today, anorexia, bulimia, can some of these problems in society be traced back to some of this Gnostic thinking of the body's inherently evil, and it could be manifesting itself in modern day society, even though technically these individuals aren't part of these sects? The ideas are still floating around in society. Do you think it's at least a possibility that this particular suffering these individuals are suffering from are a result from these ideas that are still floating around?
Well, first of all, anybody who is suffering from these diseases is in the grip of a serious struggle.
Very true.
And one wants only to be in solidarity with them. These struggles are not new.
Mm-hmm.
There was a book written here 20 years ago called Holy Anorexia, which was an examination of what we understand anorexia to be in women's monasteries and some men's monasteries in the Middle Ages.
Mm-hmm.
And we have examples from ancient Greek literature as well.
Mm-hmm.
So we need to remember these struggles are old. I've sometimes thought that in a family, one child might take on the special suffering and burden in that family.
Okay.
And become the focus of whatever that suffering and burden might be in that family.
Mm-hmm.
And then becomes the scapegoat in that family. I also wonder within our culture we live in a culture which is highly dualistic, and a culture which is very unsensual. That is, it's a culture which is preoccupied with very artificial pleasures, but not with the true sensual life, not with the wonder of our ability to see, to hear, to taste, to touch. In that sense, we live in quite a cold society. So I sometimes wonder if some people, particularly sensitive, don't begin to embody that, and that some of these struggles that we see aren't simply personal. They have something to do with the larger cultural framework in which we live, and I'm really inclined to agree with you that it is a manifestation of our society's enormous rejection of the beauty of the body.
And evolves in all of creation.
Well, you can't reject the beauty of the world and see the beauty of the body. It all comes as a package. And when you look at our world and the way we treat the world, not everybody, of course, but we live, modern industrial society and the modern technological society is unbelievably denatured. And that's telling. I was talking to, or listening to somebody the other day who was talking about having that they'd taken a trip to what is called these dark sanctuaries. You know, a place in the wilderness where there is no artificial light. And how shocked they were to see the sky.
Really?
And so you look at the world we live in, which is a world in which there's relatively little that is organic. Our encounters with unmediated nature are relatively rare. And we do this to ourselves as well. Look at the way we treat the ill and the disabled. Look at how we deal with mental illness. Look at how we deal with death.
We often disregard them, or at least hide them away somewhere so we don't have to see it or view it.
So when the natural growth and struggles associated with being a person are compartmentalized, you really nurture a kind of dualism, a kind of abstract notion of what is the good life, and discard the reality of people living no matter how they are.
Someone says, I aspire to live the Hollywood lifestyle, but if I see the downtrodden, that affects my narcissism. Therefore, let's push these individuals that don't fit that view, that dream, and let's push them aside just so we can preserve our image of the Hollywood lifestyle.
Yeah. Well, it's odd, isn't it? I mean, on the one hand, I suggest that we live in a very denatured and unsensual time. One of the largest industries in our society is the cosmetic industry.
Oh, yes.
But what's the cosmetic industry? Well, it's all about masking. It's not about, I'm not saying that, I shouldn't say it's all about that, but a large part of it is about masking. And as opposed to a cultivation of whatever the natural beauty is.
One overcomes dualistic view of reality. We know it's harmful and we know it's dangerous, but how does one really overcome this, especially when it's been so ingrained in so many people?
Well, I think it's useful at least to see that one has a kind of dualistic way of seeing the world. And I think people don't often realize that. And that certainly includes lots of Christian people as well. They're all I think my own sense is that probably the majority of people who claim to be Christians are in fact Gnostic.
I would agree with
That is, they don't really understand and lay claim to what the revelation in Jesus is about the body and the resurrection of the body. I am very touched, Derek, by in our church, and it's an old Jewish form.
Mm-hmm.
We're constantly blessing and blessing the body as well.
Mm-hmm.
Whether you make the sign of the cross, it's your body.
Mm-hmm.
Whether you anoint somebody with oil. So if we think of baptism ritual, and if we think of the mystery of Christian burial,
Mm-hmm.
and the mystery of Christian burial, the person who has died is in the coffin's open,
Mm-hmm.
and if you read that extraordinary set of prayers that shape, it's a huge poem,
Mm-hmm.
it's a poem. That person, we mention over and over again their body,
Mm-hmm.
because we understand that our body, our person, is the only one of its kind in the world.
Yep.
Modern science recognizes that too. And we say we came to be, I'll use the Jewish formulation here, we came to be because a man and a woman entered into union with each other and God was present and created life. So we are to treasure, we are taught by all this blessing, we are to treasure the body. It is in fact the temple of the Spirit that makes all things whole.
Mm-hmm.
And so, in our tradition, the body is holy.
Mm-hmm.
In our tradition, the body is meant to be whole. In our tradition, we are to bless all of creation. That's our fundamental vocation, to bless all of creation, because creation itself is the presence of the commonwealth of God.